You never really know what's waiting for you behind a new door. Maybe it's a fresh start, a blank slate, a place to finally call your own. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something you can't explain, something that makes you question your senses, your safety, and even your sanity. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories of people who moved into new homes only to be forced out by events so disturbing, so unexplainable, that they packed up and left overnight. These aren't stories about creaky floors or flickering lights. These are stories about the moments when you realize you're not alone, and that staying even one more night is simply not an option. Our first story comes from a woman named Rachel, who thought she'd found the perfect apartment in the heart of the city. She was 26, newly single, and ready to start over. The building was old but charming, with tall windows and hardwood floors that creaked in a way she found comforting. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and the landlord seemed eager to have her sign the lease. Maybe a little too eager, but Rachel chalked it up to luck. She moved in on a Saturday, her friends helping her carry boxes up the narrow staircase, laughing about how the place had character. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but happy, surrounded by the chaos of half-unpacked boxes and the promise of a new beginning. That first night, Rachel barely slept. She blamed it on excitement, the unfamiliar sounds of the city, and the way the radiator clanged every hour or so. But there was something else, too. A feeling she couldn't quite name. It was as if the apartment was watching her, waiting for her to settle in. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she was just being dramatic. But as the days went on, the feeling only grew stronger. It started with small things. She'd leave her keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the coffee table. Her phone charger would disappear from her bedroom and turn up in the bathroom. At first, she thought she was just forgetful, distracted by the stress of moving. But then, one night, she woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her bedroom. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. She lay perfectly still, her heart pounding in her chest, listening as the footsteps stopped right outside her door. She waited, barely breathing, until finally the footsteps retreated and the apartment fell silent again. The next morning, Rachel convinced herself it had been a dream. She went to work, tried to focus, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, she double-checked the locks on every door and window before going to bed. She even propped a chair under the doorknob just in case. But around 2 a.m., she woke up again, this time to the sound of whispering. It was so faint she almost thought she was imagining it. But as she strained to listen, she realized the voices were coming from the living room. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Urgent, angry, almost pleading. Rachel lay frozen, clutching her phone, debating whether to call the police. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. She waited, listening to the silence, before finally working up the courage to get out of bed. She crept down the hallway, her phone's flashlight trembling in her hand. The living room was empty, but the air felt thick, heavy, as if someone had just left. She checked the windows, still locked. The front door, still bolted. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. The next day, Rachel called her landlord, asking if anyone else had keys to the apartment. He assured her that only he and the building's super had access, and that no one had reported any break-ins. He sounded annoyed, almost dismissive, and told her she was probably just adjusting to the new place. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She started sleeping with the lights on, her phone clutched in her hand, but the disturbances only got worse. One night, she woke up to the sound of her bedroom door creaking open. She sat up, heart racing, and saw a shadow standing in the doorway. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that seemed to stretch all the way to the floor. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow just stood there, watching her, its head tilted to one side as if curious. Then, slowly, it began to move toward her, gliding across the floor without making a sound. Rachel scrambled out of bed, fumbling for her phone, but the shadow was already at the foot of her bed. She could feel the air grow colder, her breath coming out in white puffs. She backed into the corner, pressing herself against the wall as the shadow reached out a hand, long bony fingers curling toward her face. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst, but when she opened them again, the shadow was gone. The room was empty, the door still ajar. That was the last straw. Rachel didn't wait for morning. She threw her clothes into a suitcase, grabbed her keys and phone, and left the apartment without looking back. She spent the rest of the night in her car, parked outside a 24-hour diner, too shaken to even cry. The next day, she called her landlord and told him she was breaking the lease. He didn't argue. In fact, he almost sounded relieved. Rachel never found out what was haunting that apartment. She never went back for her things, never spoke to the landlord again. But sometimes, late at night, she still dreams about the shadow in the doorway and wonders what would have happened if she'd stayed just one more night. If you've ever moved into a new place, you know the feeling of possibility that comes with it. The blank walls, the empty rooms, the echo of your own footsteps as you imagine how you'll fill the space with your life. For some people, that sense of possibility is quickly replaced by something else, something darker, something that makes you question whether you ever really belonged there at all. Our second story comes from a man named Tyler, who thought he'd found the perfect house for his young family, only to discover that some places refuse to let you feel at home. Tyler and his wife Emily had been searching for months. They wanted a place with a yard for their 2-year-old daughter, a quiet street, and enough space to grow. When they found the little blue house at the end of Maple Lane, it felt like fate. The price was right, the neighborhood was friendly, and the house itself had a cozy, lived-in feel. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had left behind a few pieces of furniture and a handwritten note welcoming the new family. "May this house bring you as much happiness as it brought us," the note read. Tyler and Emily smiled at each other, feeling like they'd finally found their forever home. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, painting, and settling in. Their daughter, Lily, loved running up and down the hallway, her laughter echoing through the house. At night, Tyler and Emily would sit on the porch, watching the fireflies and talking about their plans for the future. It was everything they'd hoped for, until the night they heard the knocking. It started as a soft, rhythmic tapping on the back door. Tyler assumed it was a branch or maybe a raccoon, but when he went outside to check, there was nothing there. The next night, the knocking came again, louder this time, and always at exactly 2:13 a.m. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but Emily was unsettled. She started sleeping with the baby monitor turned up just in case. A week later, Tyler woke to the sound of Lily crying. He rushed to her room and found her standing in the corner, facing the wall, her tiny hands pressed flat against the paint. When he picked her up, she clung to him, sobbing, and whispered, "The lady is mad." Tyler's blood ran cold. He tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a bad dream, but Lily refused to sleep in her room after that. She insisted on sleeping between her parents, her small body trembling with fear. The knocking continued, always at the same time, always at the back door. Tyler set up a camera, hoping to catch whatever was causing it, but the footage showed nothing. Just the empty porch, the shadows shifting in the wind. Emily started to notice other things too. The kitchen lights would flicker, even after Tyler replaced the bulbs. The radio would turn on by itself, always tuned to static. Sometimes, when Emily was alone in the house, she'd hear footsteps upstairs, even though she knew no one was there. One night, Tyler woke to find Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the doorway. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Tyler listened, and for a moment, he heard nothing. Then, faintly, he heard it. The sound of someone crying, soft and desperate, coming from the hallway. He got up, heart pounding, and followed the sound to Lily's room. The door was closed, but the crying was louder now, almost as if someone was standing right behind it. He opened the door and found the room empty. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by a heavy silence. Tyler checked the closet, under the bed, even the window, but there was nothing. He tried to laugh it off, but Emily was pale and shaking. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something is wrong here." Tyler wanted to believe it was just stress, the exhaustion of moving and raising a toddler. But the next night, everything changed. He woke to the sound of Lily screaming. He ran to her room and found her sitting on the floor, her eyes wide with terror. "She's here," Lily sobbed. "She's in the closet." Tyler opened the closet door, expecting to find nothing, but what he saw made his blood run cold. There, etched into the wood at the back of the closet, were dozens of names, some faded, some fresh, all written in a shaky, desperate hand. At the bottom, in large, jagged letters, was the word "Leave." Tyler stumbled back, his mind racing. He grabbed Lily and ran to the bedroom, waking Emily. "We're leaving," he said, his voice shaking. "Now." They didn't pack. They didn't turn off the lights. They just grabbed their daughter and ran out the front door, not stopping until they were halfway across town. They spent the night in a motel, huddled together, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, Tyler called the realtor and told her they were breaking the lease. She didn't sound surprised. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "That house has a history." Tyler and Emily never went back. They hired movers to collect their things, refusing to set foot in the house again. Sometimes, late at night, Tyler wonders what would have happened if they'd stayed. He wonders about the names in the closet, the crying in the hallway, and the lady who made his daughter so afraid. But most of all, he's grateful they left when they did, because some houses aren't meant to be homes, and some warnings are meant to be heeded. There's a certain comfort in believing that the worst things happen to other people, in other places, far from the safety of your own home. But sometimes, the line between safety and danger is thinner than you think. Our third story comes from a college student named Marcus, who learned the hard way that even the most ordinary places can hide extraordinary secrets, and that sometimes the only way to survive is to leave everything behind. Marcus was a junior at a small university in the Midwest, majoring in engineering and living off campus for the first time. He'd found a cheap two-bedroom apartment with his best friend Chris, just a few blocks from campus. The building was old, with peeling paint and creaky stairs, but the rent was unbeatable, and the landlord seemed laid back. The place wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and for the first few weeks, it felt like freedom. The first sign that something was wrong came on a rainy Thursday night. Marcus was up late, cramming for a midterm, when he heard a strange noise coming from the apartment above. It sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor, followed by a series of heavy thuds. He glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. He figured the upstairs neighbor was just rearranging things, maybe moving out. But the next morning, when he mentioned it to Chris, his friend just shrugged. "Dude, nobody lives up there. That apartment's been empty since we moved in." Marcus laughed it off, but the next night the noises came again, this time louder, more frantic. It sounded like someone was running back and forth, slamming doors, and then suddenly a sharp, metallic scraping, like nails on a chalkboard. Marcus tried to ignore it, but sleep was impossible. The following day, he asked the landlord about the upstairs unit. The landlord, a gruff man in his 60s, just shook his head. "No one's up there. Place is locked up tight, probably just the pipes." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next week, the noises continued, always at the same time, always growing more intense. Chris started to notice them too, and soon both of them were sleeping with their doors locked and the lights on. One night, Marcus woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside their apartment. He got up, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but he could hear breathing, slow, ragged, just on the other side of the door. He backed away, locking the deadbolt, and tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. But the next morning, he found deep scratches on the outside of their door, as if someone, or something, had been trying to get in. Chris wanted to call the police, but Marcus was embarrassed. "What are we going to say?" That a ghost is trying to break in? They decided to let it go, but neither of them felt safe. A few days later, things escalated. Marcus came home from class to find Chris sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. "I saw someone," Chris whispered. "In the hallway. He was just standing there, staring at our door. When I opened it, he was gone." Marcus tried to laugh it off, but the fear in Chris's eyes was real. That night, they both slept in the living room, too afraid to be alone. Around 3 a.m., Marcus woke to the sound of whispering. It was coming from the vent above the couch, a low, urgent murmur that made his skin crawl. He nudged Chris awake, and together they listened as the whispers grew louder, more frantic, until suddenly they stopped. The apartment was silent, but the air felt heavy, charged with something Marcus couldn't name. The next morning they decided to check out the upstairs apartment. The landlord was out, so they borrowed a screwdriver and managed to jimmy the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty space filled with old furniture and boxes. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a single, grimy window. As they stepped inside, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The room was freezing, much colder than the rest of the building. They explored the apartment, finding nothing but abandoned belongings and a strange, lingering smell, something metallic, almost like blood. In the back bedroom, they found a large, dark stain on the floor, partially covered by a threadbare rug. Chris pulled the rug aside, revealing a series of deep gouges in the wood, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. On the wall, written in what looked like dried paint, or something worse, were the words, "Don't let it in." Marcus and Chris stared at each other, the reality of their situation sinking in. They left the apartment, locking the door behind them, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. But that night, the noises returned, louder, more violent than ever. The footsteps pounded up and down the hallway, the whispers echoed through the vents, and the scratching at their door became frantic, desperate. At 4 a.m., the door to their apartment rattled violently, as if someone was trying to break it down. Marcus grabbed his phone, ready to call the police, but before he could dial, the door burst open. The hallway was empty, but the air was ice cold, and the whispers filled the room, swirling around them like a storm. Chris screamed, and Marcus felt something brush past him, cold and electric, leaving him gasping for breath. That was it. They grabbed their keys, wallets, and phones and ran out of the building, not stopping until they reached the safety of a friend's apartment across town. They never went back. The landlord called, demanding to know why they'd left all their stuff behind, but Marcus just told him to keep it. Nothing was worth going back for. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus still hears the whispers in his dreams. He wonders what would have happened if they'd stayed, if they'd ignored the warnings and tried to tough it out. But deep down, he knows they made the right choice. Some places aren't meant to be lived in, and some doors should never be opened. There's a strange kind of silence that follows you after you leave a place in fear. It's not just the absence of noise, but the absence of answers, the way your mind keeps circling back, trying to make sense of what happened, replaying every detail in the hope that you'll find something you missed. For Rachel, Tyler, Emily, Lily, Marcus, and Chris, that silence became a part of their lives, a shadow that lingered long after they'd locked the doors behind them for the last time. But what's most unsettling about these stories isn't just what happened. It's what could have happened if they'd stayed. It's the realization that sometimes the only thing standing between you and something unthinkable is the decision to leave, no matter how much it costs. After Marcus and Chris left their apartment, they tried to move on. They found a new place, a little farther from campus, in a building that was newer, brighter, and, most importantly, quiet. But the experience had changed them. They double-checked every lock, jumped at every unexplained sound, and avoided talking about what had happened. Their friends joked about the haunted apartment, but Marcus could never quite laugh along. He'd wake up some nights convinced he heard whispering in the vents or footsteps in the hallway, only to find nothing there. He started keeping a journal, writing down every strange thing he remembered, hoping that putting it on paper would make it less real. But the memories never faded. If anything, they grew sharper, more vivid, as if the apartment itself was still reaching out, trying to pull him back. Tyler and Emily, too, struggled to find peace. They moved in with Emily's parents for a while, grateful for the safety of a familiar home. Lily stopped talking about the lady in the closet, but she started having nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming for her parents. Emily took her to a therapist, who said it was normal for children to have bad dreams after a big move, but Emily knew better. She could still hear the crying in the hallway, still see the names scratched into the wood. She wondered about the families who'd lived there before, about the stories that house would never tell. Sometimes she'd drive past Maple Lane, just to reassure herself that the house was still there, still standing, as if seeing it from a distance would make it less real. But every time she did, she felt a chill run down her spine, a reminder that some places never really let you go. Rachel, on the other hand, tried to erase her experience entirely. She moved in with a friend, found a new job, and avoided talking about the apartment at all costs. But the shadow in the doorway haunted her dreams, a silent presence that watched her from the corner of every room. She started sleeping with the lights on, checking the locks 3, 4, 5 times before bed. She even considered seeing a psychic, desperate for some kind of closure, but in the end, she decided it was better not to know. Some questions, she realized, are better left unanswered. What ties these stories together isn't just the fear or the unexplained events, or even the decision to leave. It's the way each person tried to rationalize what was happening, to find a logical explanation for the illogical. It's human nature to want to believe that we're in control, that the world makes sense, that there's a reason for everything. But sometimes the only explanation is that some places are wrong in a way that can't be fixed with new paint or new locks or even new memories. Sometimes the only thing you can do is trust your instincts and get out while you still can. If you're listening to this and thinking, that could never happen to me, remember that none of these people thought it could happen to them either. They were just looking for a place to live, a place to feel safe, a place to call home. But home isn't just a place. It's a feeling. And when that feeling turns to fear, when the walls start closing in and the shadows start moving, you have to ask yourself, is it worth staying just to prove you're not afraid? Or is it smarter to leave, to trust that little voice in the back of your mind that says, something isn't right here? There's a kind of bravery in leaving, in admitting that you're scared, in choosing your own safety over your pride. It's not the kind of bravery that gets celebrated or even understood, but it's real. It's the kind of bravery that saves lives, that keeps stories like these from ending in tragedy. And maybe, just maybe, it's the kind of bravery we should all be willing to show if we ever find ourselves in a place that feels wrong. As you turn off the lights tonight, as you lock your doors and settle into bed, remember these stories. Remember Rachel, who left everything behind rather than face the shadow in her doorway. Remember Tyler and Emily, who ran from the house that wouldn't let them sleep. Remember Marcus and Chris, who listened to the warnings and escaped before it was too late. And remember that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's out there in the dark. It's what's waiting for you in the places you think are safe. If you ever find yourself lying awake at night, listening to footsteps that shouldn't be there, or whispers that don't belong, don't be afraid to trust your instincts. Don't be afraid to leave, even if it means starting over. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and something you can't explain is the courage to walk away. And if you do leave, don't look back. Some doors are better left closed, some questions better left unanswered. The world is full of mysteries, and not all of them are meant to be solved. But if you listen closely, if you trust yourself, you'll know when it's time to go. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a place where the only thing waiting for you behind the door is peace.